What's up everyone, Kaze no What If is here with What If a Soul was sent into Naruto verse. Before we start, if you like the video, like it, share with your friends, comment, and let's start the video. Tsunade rushed through the hospital, heedless of the shrieking doctors or nurses, her mind focused only on her destination. The place where her brother was. She burst through the door and stopped in her tracks, her wide eyes wavering. Tears started pouring down as her wobbly steps finally reached the charred remains of her brother. She looked at the still body and the completely intact necklace of her grandfather. She could only stare in shock at it, her mind blank. Orochimaru looked at his completely distraught teammate and couldn't help but to feel bad. It should have been a simple mission. He shouldn't have even been the leader. He was only a casual observer. But they just had to be ambushed. The stupid Senju boy just had to get out of sight when he was admiring the other boy, the skill of the other boy in the team, and walk onto an exploding tag. As he watched what remained of the Senju clan, Orochimaru yet again couldn't help but ponder about his mortality. He knew the kid shouted about his dreams everywhere he went. But he ended up as a corpse. Will I have the same fate? Somehow, that thought frightened him out of his wits. Tsunade, I am sorry. It was a trap. He stopped himself as he saw Tsunade completely non-responding with a horror-filled expression. She needed time. Orochimaru sadly nodded and left. His disgust for Konoha's higher UPS increased. It was they who sent them there for a common reconnaissance. Even going as far as saying it was a completely safe thing. That they already checked with Umbu and are sending 3 Genins, 1 Senju, 1 Uchiha, and 1 Kurama, and him right under the ambush of 5 Jonin. This could have severely hurt his chances of becoming the Hokage. He sensed something smelly, and it was not Jiraiya for once. The funeral was a quick affair. Tsunade was used to those. She attended a few every year. Her clan was now only her. A shudder ran through her body. Only her. Only a woman who is utterly unable to recreate it. Only God. The Senju clan is dead. A traitorous thought started to fill her mind. She mostly wondered why was Nawake personally requested for that mission right after she talked with her sensei about her inability to have children. Why wasn't the last fertile Senju kept inside the village? Why? But she waved them away. Her sensei would never. Stupid girl, she admonished herself. These days, she completely disregarded the hospital. All she had to do was sign off the dead at the end of the day. The dead that could survive if she could bring herself to look them over. But she didn't care. She spent her days sitting in front of Nawake's grave, pondering what to do. In the end, it was all meaningless. Her life was meaningless. Then her eyes brightened as she remembered the energy spike. She promised to Nawake. She promised him she will look forward and fulfill her own dreams. With a broken smile and hitched sobs, Tsunade decided. She will find out what caused the spike, and she will find out why she was so drawn to it. Nawake would want her to live. To fulfill her dreams. The sadness in her mind cleared and she started to look forward. A new determination filling her. Tsunade suddenly felt a hand on her shoulder and barely restrained herself from killing whoever dared to touch her. Are you fine? Tsunade jerked her head toward the voice and found a light blue-haired man. Dan. She murmured, making the man astonished that she remembered him. What the heck is this annoyance doing here? He is stalking me again? Jeez. Trying to approach me when I am at my lowest? Tsunade frowned. Canon Tsunade would be moved that someone cared. But then again, Canon Tsunade was emotionally so down she literally wouldn't mind dying. This Tsunade, however, had a goal. Determination to live. The man was trying to get closer to her for 2 years straight. She would understand if he had a crush, but he didn't. As a medic she could see his body reactions. Tsunade really didn't know what the man wanted from her. I am fine. She politely smiled, albeit a tad bit too forcedly for her taste. Ah. Okay. Dan didn't think he would find her like this. Hokage told him to approach Tsunade and make sure she is feeling fine. He fancied himself a somewhat smart man and knew the underlying meaning of these words. If he got closer to her and got the support of the head of the Senju clan, meaning Tsunade, becoming a Hokage would be easier than ever. Hiruzen really wanted to desperately give someone the hat. Dan resisted the urge to chuckle in order to appear compassionate. What about? He tried to start a conversation. Tsunade stood up, ignoring him, and brushed past him before he could even finish the sentence. Dan could only look at her, leaving back with his cold gaze as a loud colorful curse left his mouth, making the nearby grandmas look at him threateningly while raising their garden hose. Did I approach too abruptly? He asked himself quietly. Fuck. The bitch. 2 years and she still doesn't give me even a second of her time. The flowers in his hand were violently thrown onto the ground as he ruffled his hair in annoyance. If I ever get her, I am going to fuck her silly until she won't be able to think about anything else than me. Dan calmed down as he stomped onto the flowers for a few times from the sheer frustration he felt. The worst part is that I really do start to like her. He sighed with a bitter grimace as he calmed down. I would probably desperately fall in love with her with enough time. Hiruzen. You sly fox. Dan muttered and shook his head as he decided to pay his respect to the deceased since he is already at the cemetery. Tsunade marched on into the Senju compound and entered the library. Her library? It all now solely belonged to her. She had money. She had knowledge. She had privileges. She lacked only family. They were all dead. Sigh. Now, if only the war ended and she could leave this hellhole of sad memories and self-imposed bastards who would never give money to save lives. Oh, she understood that Hiruzen-sensei was not to blame. Even though it was him who always rejected her medic per team proposal. It was the elders who always whispered into his ear. The trusted elders that were Hiruzen-sensei's teammates. The same greedy bastards that would rather people die than their pocket change to suffer. The same people he trusted more than his own pupils. Tsunade was fed up. Fed up with politics. Fed up with funerals. Fed up with Konoha. She wanted to leave and she will leave. She will find what caused the spike that is filling her mind and she will die happy, taking the Senju clan with her to an early grave. That was the plan. Nodding to herself, she approached the shelves. Now. Let me see. Nature energy, nature energy. She browsed through the books, looking for anything even remotely helpful for her future endeavors. Sigh. If only I didn't take Shizen Kato as my apprentice. She mumbled, not even realizing that Dan was also called Kato. Ah, screw it. That girl can form medical chakra as 6 years old. I can take her with me when I leave and then deposit her back in Konoha after her training is finished. Tsunade ruffled her hair and with her decision was made. A year passed since Rei and Konan found their Mokuton ability. They both decided to abuse the shit out of it and spam trees whenever possible. Whenever they were sure that nobody watched. This also made them evade any and all towns or villages as they entered the AIM Mountains and didn't leave them for the entire year. It was a very quiet area. Nothing important. Nothing really advantageous. The shinobi didn't come here. They encountered one lone Kumo spy, but Rei and Konan made the spy meet his maker swiftly. Surprisingly, the loot was quite good. Most of their time was spent on affinity training though. As Rei thought, this tree spamming made them unconsciously better at water and earth affinity. They didn't know the exercises for the affinities other than the one with the paper, so they trained what they found hard. Both Konan and Rei could float a boulder while sitting on it for 3 hours until their chakra depleted. This was what they found hardest when it came to earth affinity. They had to continuously mold earth chakra and supply the boulder with it to make it float through gravity. Rei started to seriously suspect that Oniki was not floating himself but the specks of dust on the soles of his feet and in his clothes that pushed him up. Or maybe he just used his rock-hard brain for it? Who knows? This exercise though, they could not do it with smaller rocks while sitting on them yet. Nor with something bigger and heavier than an adult human. That would take an enormous amount of chakra from them. They still needed more practice. More perfection. As for water release, they focused on the feeling of water in the atmosphere. Both Konan and Rei could even feel the water in the clouds. But pulling it out of them, meh. Thankfully in Aim no Kuni water was supplied very frequently. Their first exercise that took them 3 whole months was all about standing in the rain and making sure the droplets evade them. They simply had to stay dry. Which was a freaking chore when you are walking in a downpour. They had to always supply water chakra and coat themselves with it. It was like a human-shaped makeshift umbrella or aura around them. It was completely invisible, but it worked. When they were both sure they could stay dry even under a waterfall, they tried something more challenging. They tried to pull water out of the surroundings. Easy, right? They were in a country where water always fell from the sky. But no. They tried to pull the water in the surroundings and add it to the clouds. It was a backbreaker, but their improved Michinin reserves barely managed it. It was more about water chakra control anyway than the amount of their chakra. This made sure there was always a downpour in their location. But no worries, they had their umbrella no jutsu. The downpour was not the result. Only a step. When they finally managed to make a downpour, they had to stop it. Make the rain in their location stop. Keep it in the clouds. Both Rei and Konan felt as if the heavens were pushing onto them during that exercise. The rain wanted to pour down onto the earth, but they held. They held insane amounts of water in the sky. Until the clouds started to get charged with lightning, and instead of downpour, a lightning storm started. Rei used this for his lightning chakra training, as he made sure to try and use his Raiten chakra to redirect the lightning strikes where he wanted to. Mostly on the trees Konan was creating. She became incredibly proficient in it. No wonder though. Konan found a new cheat for herself. Rei was quite fed up with her Keki Itoda when he found out. It was yet another bullshit in his opinion. Konan could change the tree into slices of paper. They didn't even need to be made by Mokutan. Just Mokutan chakra supplied to a very normal tree and bam. One tree could be changed to thousands of slices of paper. The best part? The chakra used for that was actually minimal if she raised the tree herself via Mokutan. Konan now had always thousands of papers soaked in her chakra. She just had to grow them from the ground. Rei vowed he would train hard when he saw it. Fortunately, his water manipulation was a hell of a lot better than Konan's. As for earth, they were about the same. Rei always added nature chakra into the water, increasing its volume and density. His chakra nature manipulation was leaps and bounds above Konan, where she could potentially create a house-sized ball of water in 10 minutes. REI could create an entire lake in 5. And then there was his lightning affinity. Hee. Zap zap. Their biggest problem was, they still had no jutsu, so they could not compare what they could do with actual ninjas. REI found a few Kenjutsu scrolls on the poor Kumo lad and he trained with his Chokito. Konan just shrugged them off and said her futon paper is enough for cutting power. But they both knew she was kinda behind in her futon. By now it was more effective to maul her enemies with Doton hardened paper than cut them with futon enhanced paper. The damned paper was hard as steel. If she stacked enough, she could even block her futon enhanced paper, and that was telling something since these could literally fly through 3 trees and then make a hole through a half of a boulder. Hell, the thickness of that paper shield was not even an inch. Yes. Maybe they really overdid their Doton affinity training a little. Considering they were 10 while their bodies looked 12 years old. Konan was actually able to completely soak up an entire lake with her papers and make them still look as if they didn't even have a drop of water on them. The more her water affinity improved, the more bullshit that aspect of her Keki Itota became. REI started to see why it was so rare and people were so amazed by it. Her papers may not have the destructibility of dust release but the sheer utility. Konan was carrying a lake with her everywhere and it didn't even burden her. When she learns to change her body into paper like her canon counterpart, she will literally have a lake inside of her body and could potentially also harden it to the levels of her Doton hardened paper shield that blocked the futon shuriken. REI shuddered at the future prospects. REI on the other hand could not carry so much water with him. He compensated. He could pull enough water to create a ball of the size of a small house almost instantly. Most of the time it was enough, but he knew it was nowhere near Hoshigaki Same or the best water users. He also used Doton chakra on his clothes to make them harder to penetrate while retaining their flexibility. A trick learned from Konan. But his Doton enhanced with nature chakra was much tougher. His Kenjutsu with Raiten chakra was getting better and better by the day, and he was even able to use a minuscule amount of nature chakra to make his lightning a shimmering grayish black. But nevertheless, it was much more powerful than the blue one. He barely controlled it as his lightning affinity was the least trained so far. A pity that his supreme chakra control talent worked perfectly only for regular chakra. In elemental chakra, it helped a whole lot, but it was still far from perfect. REI was the proudest of his body strength. He left Konan completely in dust in this department. She was still very powerful in Taijutsu, but REI was even more so. The nature chakra he pulled into his body each night enhanced him leaps and bounds, making him faster, stronger, more durable. He was quite sad that Konan was having at most 1/3 of his enhancement since her body was unable to use the nature chakra to its fullest extent. Alas, she just did not have the godly talent for it. REI was shaping up to be quite the swordsman. It would certainly be helpful when he finally starts Senjutsu training. But slowly, their training time ended and they decided they had enough of the mountains. It was time to leave and get some experience. And loot. REI and Konan were going down the mountains, hand in hand. REI was leisure while Konan was outright skipping. She didn't really care where they were as long as she was with REI. They were almost in the closest village to the mountain and finally reached a road frequented by merchants that want to avoid shinobi skirmishes. Konan suddenly stopped skipping and was about to raise her free hand, her papers about to burst from her sleeve, but REI squeezed the hand he held. Konan looked at him questioningly only to find him minutely shaking his head. Shrugging, they continued. Suddenly a band of 10 men jumped out of the bushes. They barely scrambled out of them with scratches all around their bodies and barely managed to surround REI and Konan in a very loose formation. They held weapons. More like gardening tools really. Their clothes were torn and their expressions distraught as they panted. The men weren't even burly. More like starving. The leader even had to catch his breath for a few seconds before he looked ready to let out a sound again. How underwhelming, thought Rei as he was deadpanning at the men. Tisk, thought Konan as she rolled her eyes, infusing her paper with futon chakra. Only one gesture from Rei and she was ready to slaughter these nuisances. Why you? So surrender and I will not harm you. Har, hardly. Rei dryly uttered. The bandits looked at the 12-years-old looking boy as if he was an idiot. He was being threatened by a bunch of powerful men and was openly mocking them. Yo, you should know what's best for you. The leader shouted. He was getting more and more uneasy about these two kids by the second. Normal kids would be already pissing themselves, but these two looked at him as if he was insane. He chose them as a target because their clothes looked expensive. They looked wealthy. At worst he could probably ask for a ransom from some wealthy merchant who was most likely their father. But look, man, Rei slowly but purposefully puffed his chokito into existence, making the men freeze. We can do this your way, or we can do it my way. The bandits froze. They have never seen a ninja in their life. Ninjas were rare. But they did hear about the might of theirs. After all, their country was ravaged by shinobi. The merchants sang the atrocities these things did. Whole towns disappearing. Yes, shinobis were a scary existence for the common folk. Especially during a war. I am sorry. The leader threw himself on his knees, straight into Dogza. We didn't mean to shinobi no, shinobi-sama. We didn't mean to. The rest of the bandits quickly followed. Rei almost did a double take. He could only awkwardly look at snickering Konan. Look, man. If you wanna play a bandit, at least get the mannerism right, k. Now, lead us to your village. Rei rubbed his forehead in exasperation at these idiots while Konan slightly pouted that her paper shurikens won't be used. For now. Rei and Konan quickly found themselves sitting in the kitchen of the village elder who was coincidentally the father of the idiot playing a bandit. The bandit group was 10 farmers who thought to make their lives better by stealing. They never thought about the consequences, really. They were currently in Caesar as their spouses and parents were berating them while Rei only sat behind the table, his chin supported by his hands as his elbows were on the table. He happily watched, beaming every time one of these idiots was smacked. Serves them right? Haha. What were you thinking, you? With every you the wife of the leader delivered a painful swat on his forehead with a roll of paper. The man was growing quite a bruise on his forehead. I am sorry dear. He exclaimed with tears and snot streaming down his cheeks. The woman looked as if her anger was sated after beating the man, but Rei was a petty person, too petty to let it go. You know, if it was any other shinobi you would be all dead. He exclaimed cheerfully, attracting attention as he started to explain his reasoning. It was obvious they were not bandits but farmers from some village around. This is the only village around though. Hence, your actions could have cost this village its life. He told them with a fake cheerful smile, still beaming at them. The woman brokenly turned back to her husband, snarl on her face as she gripped the knife in her hand tighter. Oh shit. Rei excitedly thought as he used his chakra string to get the knife from the woman, making her turn to him. No butchering your husband. You can beat him senseless though. Rei smiled. With pleasure. She cracked her knuckles as the terrified man let out a manly high-pitched squeal. REI just watched in amusement as the idiot suffered a beating or two. Or 10. After all, he was the mastermind and every man in his little group had a spouse. Or mother. Or father that wanted to tear him a new one. Ah, what a fine way to spend an afternoon. Nothing beats watching some well-deserved justified violence. REI grinned from ear to ear. The village they were in was a very out-of-hand, peaceful if a bit too poor one. They didn't need the outer world much. They could make enough clothes, grow enough food, and even had some cattle. They were not affected by the war much except that more merchants were passing by their village in recent months. Which was a good thing. The reason for banditry was that their crops for this year were very, very poor. This happened at least once per decade, so it was not a new situation. The men would just need to go to the town and find some work there for a few months in order to buy enough food for their household. Nothing new. The problem was the war. The towns would not let them get work. They were barely able to function as it was. They could not take new workers. The village would starve. It was an apparent and very distinct possibility for the village, and it was looming over their heads, getting closer by the day as their food supplies dwindled. But the villagers knew they indeed do have a way out. But the merchants who passed usually had enough money. And they more often than not looked for a companion on a cold night. If men could not make enough money, women could. That was what drove the man to try his hand on banditry. He just didn't want his wife to sell her body in order to ensure their daughter will have enough to eat. It was clear the villagers were mostly resigned, and one of them was rumored to even start offering his 3 daughters to the merchants for a night. REI could believe it. The girls did not look happy when he saw them. Gloomy and resigned. But this was the reality of this world. And yet, here they were. The villagers sharing their food with him and Conan. He couldn't do anything but shake his head at the kindness of these people. That's why he was now, in the middle of the night, standing with Conan on the edge of their field. They surprisingly grew potatoes. He and Conan connected their hands and focused on molding chakra. Apparently one could use chakra without molding. They could grow a tree without molding. But if one adds molding, it becomes a jutsu. Because molding gives the chakra a kind of a manual direction. It strengthens the effect exponentially and makes chakra possible to affect the world more. For example, Hashirama had a lot more chakra than Rei and Conan together. But even he would be able to raise at most 30 trees with his chakra supply alone. But when one added molding and made it into jutsu, he was suddenly able to raise forests and gigantic statues, capable of restraining a Baijuyo. That is why jutsus were so revered. The growth of strength rose exponentially while the cost decreased even more. That was what determined the rank of a jutsu. How much stronger it was comparable to its cost. Of course, higher rank needed higher destructibility. Also, one cannot spit the ocean like Hoshigaki, same with water chakra alone. Oh, Rei tried. But after he produced only an ordinary spit over 100 times, he gave up. He could only gather water from his surroundings and affect it with his water chakra. Like he and Conan did with the clouds. But once one creates the chakra in his throat and mold it, it suddenly became possible. Same with fire. Same with earth. Same with any element. It was almost laughable, and Rei understood that hand signs were nothing but pre-learned sets of molding. One of the IWAnin had a book about it, but it made no sense to Rei until he realized that simple single thing about molding. Kids are taught hand signs and how to mold their chakra instinctively according to these signs in the academy. Some are better, some worse. But if one wanted to be shinobi, he had to know how to mold his chakra. That's why some people could skip some hand signs. They just could mold the jutsu without them because they were very proficient in it. That's what Rei and Konan wanted to do. But it was hard. Learning to mold their chakra without a crutch. But they persevered. By now, after an entire half year of on and off of trying, they could still only instinctively mold chakra according to one hand sign. It was a long run, indeed. They molded the chakra, slowly, kneaded it, and interwove it into their jutsu. It took them 30 minutes of continuous molding and focusing, but finally, they had what they wanted. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you liked it, subscribe to my channel for more fan fictions like this, and goodbye.